everyone. I'm Jimmy Don Kerr, and this is the SmallTown Collectibles YouTube channel. My guest today is one half of the dynamic duo on the Casually Comics Sunday Chat on the Comics Will Break Your Heart YouTube channel. And this cracked me up. I try to do these intros, and I read this bio on her YouTube channel, and I was like, I got to read this. This is awesome. Her bio on YouTube says, I am a 20-something-year-old angry dwarf with one hell of an opinion, especially when it comes to comics. I love everything about that. Everybody join me in welcoming to 10 Questions, Mars, a.k.a. ThatComicGirlll.
Howdy, friends. How's it going? Thank you so much for having me on the show today. I'm excited to have a blast.
Awesome, man. I was telling you before we came on, and just for the people that are watching, I am a big fan of the Casually Sunday Comic Chat. I interviewed Jen here on 10 Questions. It's been a while back, and I've been watching it for a while. It's kind of my Monday morning drive to work. That's what I listen to, is Mars and Jen talk about, comic books. And so I was telling Mars, she's like part of the family, like part of the YouTube family for me, as far as what I listen to on a regular basis. And so they have a really, really, if you don't know what they do, it's a really, really smart review of comic books. And they dive into it in different ways. There's a lot of different titles, maybe titles that a lot of us wouldn't necessarily read every week, which I find interesting because I like to read and I like to read different things. So I always find that interesting. But yeah, definitely, if you don't know that Casually Comic Sunday Chat, you need to go check it out. But let's jump into our interview. And Mars, question one is always the same. And it's what or who got you into comic books or collecting in general?
Oh, so that is definitely, I don't want to say a loaded question, but it's definitely a long-winded question for sure. Because there's different like origin stories. Like I always feel like the X-Men or Batman or whatever. It's like, well, I guess those are bad examples because they always have very clear, definitive origins. I'd say maybe I'm more like a Power Girl where it feels like every couple years she gets a new origin. So I read my first comic book, when I was in high school. I always had this love for comic book characters. I grew up with the Batman animated series. I grew up with, the Tim Burton Batman movies, and I always felt that I was a comic fan, even though I didn't read comics. So when I was in high school, my 10th grade English teacher noticed that I really liked these characters, and he introduced me to my first ever comic, that comic being The Watchmen. And that kind of spiraled my love from there. It was like I thought that comics were supposed to be Batman goes out and catches the Joker, Superman goes out and punches Lex Luthor. I didn't realize comics could be smart and in depth the way that The Watchmen was. So that kind of, piqued my interest from there. The first two books that I read on my own that I bought myself were Batman Hush and Marvel Comics Civil War, which are not very good starting pieces because both have a lot of characters that I wasn't familiar with. And, it was me trying to follow along. And I stopped reading comics after that. And it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years later when I was in college, I found myself on South Street in Philadelphia in a little comic shop called Atomic City Comics. And I met a really good friend there who was like, hey, if you want to get into comics, let's sit down, let's get you some comics. Again, did not start off the best way because the two comics he handed me were Avengers vs. X-Men and Red Hood and the Outlaws from the New 52. And again, not very good starting comics because I'm here questioning, well, why did Cyclops kill Xavier? Why does Batman have more than one son? Who is Jason Todd? Like, I was just really confused. And then when I went home from college, I kept reading comics. And I found myself in my first ever comic book shop and reading books and putting stuff on a pull list. And it, honestly, after that, it just spiraled. So
Awesome. So, I mean, really for you, it's more about the literary piece. It's about the reading. You said you grew up, you were watching a lot of the TV shows and things like that, but what really drew you to it was the writing itself. Like, how long did it take you to, like you said, you didn't start at the best place, as far as to jump in reading. Like, what would you say was the place where you were like, okay, all right, now I get it? And, was there a particular book or character that kind of took you there?
for particular character, I want to say it was definitely like Green Arrow. because I did start a pool list and things like that, and I had a couple titles on my pool list. Like I had Catwoman of the New 52 on my pool list. I was reading new books as they came out, like Batman and Superman by Greg Pak. And Jay Lee and things like that. But I was really focusing on characters that piqued my interest. And I was also leaning DC heavy, because I grew up with DC Comics. I always preferred those characters over Marvel. And I'm now starting to jump into Marvel 8 years later. But I would find myself at like little shops here and there that had like rows and rows of dollar comics. And I would honestly just pick up books with characters that looked interesting to me. And I would, read that single issue and that character would pique my interest and I'd go from there. And I remember Green Arrow being one of those characters that for some reason I was just drawn to. And I think we might be able to touch into that a little bit later, but it was a character I was just drawn to, and I really liked him. And I found myself picking up all of the single issues of the Kevin Smith and Judd Winnick run and reading that run from start to finish. And I just kind of kept leaping from character to character as they would interest me. And I was the type of person where I have to read you from start to finish. So it kind of spiraled everything out from there.
Cool. So do you go back and read like back issues of these characters? Like once you find one that you love, do you go back and read like back issues, or are you really just kind of jumping all over to different storylines?
I jump a little bit all over to different storylines now. I used to be that type of person where it's like, okay, here's the starting, here's the ending. But as I've talked about on my personal channel and I've talked about on the show with Jen, I'm not a huge fan of comics that aren't considered modern. So anything written pre like 2000s, I personally struggle with just the way that they're wrote and the way that they're handled and things like that. Again, Green Arrow being one of the very few titles with Mike Grell's run that I've read from the 80s, and a couple things here and there for like Scarlet Witch and Vision. But I kind of just jump all over and I try to find storylines that interest me. Of course, I'll always try to start with, when it comes to like DC particularly, I try to start with maybe not a New 52 run because it's not very good, but I'll start with like volume 1 of their Rebirth or volume 1 of like something that they have pre-Crisis and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, well, I find that interesting. I like, because I'm a reader too. Like I enjoy reading, and I enjoy reading a lot of different titles. And I agree, it is harder. Like I enjoy reading the older stuff, but you got to kind of know what it is, and you got to have some more time, right? Because it's really wordy, and it's really it's special for its time frame and what it was,
Exactly.
and different eras have different things that make them special. So, but no, that's cool. I love that. All right, so question 2. What drew you to YouTube, like to start actually making content on YouTube?
So I had started ThatComicGirlll, the persona and things like that years ago on platforms like Tumblr and things like that. And it really started with, I just had a personal Tumblr where I would talk about comics and comics I loved. And, people came to me, it felt like because of because when I get into something, I get obsessed and I, meticulously research everything and figure out as much as I can, which is what has happened with comics. But a lot of people would come to me and be like, I really like this character. What should I read? And I would make like a detailed list with like little infographics. Okay, you should read this, and this and this. And more people started flocking to that. So then I was like, okay, I know how hard it was for me to get into comics because, I was dropped 2 very intense storylines. So I was like, let me kind of start this platform where I can make comics as accessible as possible to people that want to know these characters or these storylines or just comics in general. And it started off as just a little side blog where I would, write recommendation lists. I would write, reviews and little thought pieces and things like that. But it feels like the way that we consume media and content is changing. Blogs were very big in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. We're all kind of stepping into this platform now where we want our content on the go and we want to be able to just turn it on and keep moving. Like you said, you watch our show when you drive to work. Mm-hmm. So podcasts and YouTube are really taking over. So I definitely had that thought in mind when it came to producing content. And again, this is something for years people would say, you really should have a YouTube channel. And also too, if you haven't noticed, I have a very strong personality, both in humor and just intensity in general. So it felt like for somebody with my type of personality and my type of passion for comics, YouTube really was that easy step. I think the reason it took me as long as it did was because I was afraid, because I was, a girl in comics, because comics were such a niche medium, maybe because I didn't have that, YouTube look per se, because it's a very big step jumping from paper to screen.
Sure. No, it really is. I said it's very even for me, and I'm much older than you, and it was. It's number one. It's just weird talking into a camera when nobody else is
Weird.
around. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, to start doing it, and it's strange. And then two, just to put yourself out there because we all know with social media, it's negative in a lot of it's positive in a lot of ways, but it's also negative in a lot of ways. And it's very scary to put yourself out there to be judged by people that you don't know, or not that I'm old enough, I don't care what anybody thinks, I just do what I do and roll on. But yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. So your personality, it's one of the things that I love about you, is it's so strong. And have you always been like that, even as a child, like growing up? Were you always that way?
I have. I was always the loud person in the class getting kicked out because I was either being too loud or making too many jokes. And, I was always the kid out of my three siblings, or my two siblings, because it's two and me, where it's like, you're the loudest one. Why can't you just go into the corner and play with toys and, let us have some peace and quiet? So, yeah, it's something that's always been around.
I have a daughter that reminds me a lot of you, in the way that she's very opinionated. I think it's why I'm drawn to you in one sense, is because my daughter reminds me a whole lot of you. Like, she's very opinionated. She's loud, and you always know when she's in the room. And so, but I love that. I don't know, because I'm more reserved in a sense. My wife is more like that, as far as when she's in the room. My oldest daughter is more like me too. So I don't know. It's like I said, I don't know. I always love that about you. All right. So question 3, and I want to talk about the Casually Sunday Comic Chat, and that is really how I found you, and Jen for that matter. Was I was looking for something, a review show. I would listen to you guys while I was driving, and I really enjoyed your all's take on books, because it was very different than a lot of the review shows that I had heard up to that point, and it really kind of suited what I was looking for. And so, what brought you? A, how did you and Jen hook up as far as that show is concerned,
Mhm.
and then B, what drew you to the review aspect of content, like doing these comic book reviews?
Okay. So Jen doesn't even know this. I'm actually revealing this to Jen today, not when this is dropping, but as we're filming, because today is the 1 anniversary of the Casually Comic Show. But I've always been a huge fan of Jen. Like, I found her on Instagram years ago. Like, I'm thinking probably 2016, 2017. I found her on Instagram, and I was like, this girl is just the coolest girl in the world. I want to hang out with her. And, I was kind of intimidated by her because she seemed so knowledgeable. She seemed like it felt like I had never really had found another girl in comics that I could be friends with. And I just wanted to be friends with a girl who also liked comics. And so it was kind of like we followed each other for a while, and we would occasionally comment on somebody's thing here and there. But I was a huge fan of Jen. I was like, I just want to be friends with you. And then I started doing my YouTube channel. She started doing a show with Dan over on Comic Chop News, where it was kind of like this weekly review type show. And she messaged me one day and was like, hey, I love you. I love your vibe. I want to get another female on this show just so that way, we can bounce ideas off each other. Do you want to come in and do a surprise episode or special episode of Comic Chop News with us? And I was like, yeah, of course. I want to hang out with you and talk comics with Dan. And I was just really excited. And our relationship kind of just spiraled from there because we realized we had very similar ideas. We realized we had very similar tastes, but also very different tastes because, she leans Marvel, I lean DC, but I think the way that we just feel about comics in general was very similar. And it all started with, hey, I love Batwoman, you love Batwoman. Let's do a live show of our own, just a one night special thing where we just discuss why Batwoman and Kate Kane means as much as she does to us. And we did. And I remember we both got off of stream that night and we were sitting backstage and we must have sat there for another half hour, 45 minutes just talking. And we're like, we could keep doing this. And we did one show, and the outpouring support we got from just our first couple shows alone was maybe we need to keep doing this, because we had people being like, your show isn't like other people we see. You guys have these opinions that people don't. The fact that you guys are women talking about comics, it's a big deal. And I don't know. I guess we just never looked back. We really didn't. So I'm really thankful that, you know, I guess, fawning over Jen and like wanting to be her friend turned into an actual legitimate friendship, because she really is like one of my closest friends now.
That's awesome. Well, and you guys really do have great chemistry. Like, you know, and you do. You're different, but you come from a similar place. Like, that's why I talk about that a lot. Is, you know, we can all have differences of opinion and things like that, but we all have this singular love, which is comic books, and it's easy to be friends when that's the case. And you guys, it is. You guys work really, really well on screen together, and I like what you said. It is different, and when I found you, that's what I dug about it. Is it was different. And it was a different kind of review, and that was that's what ultimately made me a every week listener. Like, I'll occasionally try to jump on and say, "Hey, what's up, girls?" And, you know, and then I, you know, have to go. But so, what drew you to the comic book review? Like, you personally, like what about that do you love?
So drawing to comic book reviews, I've just always been that type of person where I love to dissect media, whether it be TV, video games, comic books, or literature. I'm always that type of person that probes it one deep further than I should. Like, I get told all the time by like family members when I'm talking about like a movie, and they're like, well, it is just a movie. And I'm like, but it actually isn't. There was all of this that had to go into it, all of this writing, all of this research, the technique, and everything like that. But also, too, with comics in general, I write comics. I don't have anything published yet, but my dream is to one day be able to write comics as well alongside some of these creators and these publishers. So I also take that into effect too, of how do I approach it as a writer? What would I maybe do different, you know, with my comic writer brain and things like that. And I don't know, I've just always been the type of person to dissect things a little further and question the why. And then, of course, too, I want to give an honest opinion of something, because as you've seen on the show, if I don't like something, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there that do sugarcoat pretty much everything because they don't want to step on toes. They don't want to step on people's feelings. And again, I try to do that in the most respectful way possible, but I'm also not a very good liar. So it comes off sometimes as being harsh and brutal and critiquing.
No, well, that's what's cool about it, though, is not everything's good. You know, and people do have different opinions. Like, there are some books that I've heard you be pretty harsh on that I liked, you know, for whatever reason. I liked them. But I enjoyed hearing your perspective on it. And, you know, and it made me read the book differently. Like, I've noticed going back and saying, okay, well, Mars didn't really dig that. Why? Okay. And then I'll go back and I'll reread and I'll say, okay, I see what she's saying there, you know, and it really is kind of a deeper way to read the book and taking that, you know, consume that kind of media. It's just a different way. It's a more thoughtful way. So I love that. So let's make this question 4, because I want to know about this. It's something that you just said, is that you want to write comics. Do you have a particular genre that you're looking to? Is it superhero based? Is it more indie based? Like, what are you thinking there?
It's a little bit of everything, if I'm being honest. So when I first started realizing I wanted to write comics was probably about 6 or 7-ish years ago. And it was when I fell in love with the medium, and I would look into characters, you know, at the time for DC Comics, I would look at characters like Green Arrow. I would look at characters like Power Girl or Granny Goodness, like characters that sometimes don't see the big spotlight. And I'd be like, I have some good ideas that I just kind of want to put to paper. And a lot of people start that off as like, oh, well, you're just writing basic fan fiction. To which I say, aren't all comics basically fan fiction, for lack of a better word? You know, it's fan fiction until it's printed and published. I mean, even then, it's still kind of fan fiction. So I started off with, I want to write superhero books. And then I would meet with creators. You know, I had the pleasure of being able to discuss this passion with creators like Greg Pak and Paul Levitz. And, you know, they would actually sit with me and talk with me. And a lot of them, at that time, it felt very nail in the coffin, where they're like, you can't just start off with superheroes. You have to start off with independent stuff. And it kind of got me a little upset, but then it made me realize, okay, no, you're right. I need to show my strength as a writer, not as what I can do for these characters. And this was also, too, when I was just starting to discover my love of indie comics. So it's kind of transformed where, yeah, I do have stories for characters in the big two that I would love to put to paper one day, or see these emotions and moments flushed out. But there are a lot of indie stories that I would like to work on as well. You know, there's post-apocalyptic stories that I'm working on. There's actually a new horror comic that I just started laying out the basic outlines for, and I don't even have a title or really much of a premise, but sometimes I'll be driving or I'll watch a movie or a show and I'll be like, what if I did this small little instance? Like maybe it's something that's just touched upon, but I expanded it into something so much bigger, you know? So I would say my writing style has definitely evolved, and that's a good thing. And it's evolved, I think, with my taste in comics, because I feel like I have really gone from only reading superhero comics and only wanting to consume big two content to now I actually prefer consuming independent content and consuming these original stories.
Yeah. So when you decide, like, okay, one day you're sitting around, you're like, you know what, I'd really like to write a comic book. Like, do you start taking classes? Do you like? I mean, I know that's probably a very basic and dumb question, but like, I want, like, where, like, how does that start? Like, how do you train yourself?
So there's definitely classes that you can take. I know Scott Snyder, for one, has just opened up a class within the past couple months, I think, on his Substack page. I personally have never actually taken a comic book class. As I said before, I talk with a lot of writers, so Greg Pak, Paul Levitz, Jimmy Palmiotti. I've talked to all of these big known guys just to kind of see how they style stuff. And I feel like when I meet people, at least not as much now, because more so I'm focused on putting our channels out there, names out there. But whenever I would meet people at conventions, my first question after I praised their work or told them how much I love a book was, what is your thought process? How do you start writing? And I would get really good answers from some people. I also am that type of person where I like collecting and buying comic book scripts. I have a couple scripts from Gail Simone. I have one from Jimmy Palmiotti. I have another one from, I'm drawing a blank right now, but I have a couple of different scripts, and every writer does really write their books different. And you can see scripts in the back of some comics as well, because a lot of them publish that as additional content. And it's kind of just seeing how these writers stylize things, and going from there. Jim Zub in particular has a really, really great piece on his website where he kind of breaks down how to create a comic book pitch, what goes into a pitch, what you need to do, because there's the elevator pitch, which you can do in about 4 sentences to grab somebody's attention. But then there's the larger pitch that really sells it to the publisher. And that usually comes off as across like 1 or 2 pages. And it's just kind of been working from there and kind of mimicking, maybe not mimicking, but taking different pieces from other creators, you know, routine and style, and making it my own and doing what I feel comfortable with.
Cool. So do you have, like, I mean, do you just sit down, so an idea comes to you, you start making some notes, and then you sit down and you try to put it all together? Do you have like a dry erase board set up somewhere that you're, you know, putting ideas on? Like, kind of how does that process work for you?
I would love to have a dry erase board, and maybe that will come with the future apartment, but in this little setup now, no dry erase board. So everything right now I keep on my phone. So when I'm out, and it's going to sound really terrible, my ideas come best when I'm in the shower and when I'm driving down the road. I don't know why. It's always the 2 most convenient places where your best ideas come from. The shower, I kind of get screwed, and I kind of just keep repeating it to myself until I can get out and grab my phone and write stuff down, because one time I grabbed the phone in the shower, that did not end up well. So now I just kind of keep it as I go. But when I'm driving down the road, you know, I have my little handheld phone stand. I will, you know, open up the notes app or a voice recorder app, and I will just start talking. And sometimes it could just be belligerent nonsense. And then I'll sit down and I'll break everything apart. And I'll be like, okay, here are the ideas that I want. Sometimes it's full on ideas. Sometimes it's full events that happen to characters. Sometimes it's as simple as character names. So I worked in call centers for years, and I would talk to hundreds of people a day. And sometimes you see and meet and talk to people with really interesting names. And I would just come up with like a backstory for this character based on their name. And I would write it down and take it home. And sometimes I wouldn't have a story to go with it, but it's something that I knew I wanted to use later on. So I have notebooks. I have, you know, 1,000,000 hours, it feels like, in my phone just recorded. It's crazy. It's a little crazy, I'll be honest.
No, that's awesome. No, I always wondered, like, I mean, I'm a big Metallica fan, so I've watched pretty much every Metallica documentary or whatever. And James Hetfield, the way that he writes is it's kind of like what you said. He's got a notebook that he carries with him. He'll write stuff down, and then at some point, Kirk Hammett or somebody like that comes up with a riff, and he's like, "Oh, this would go really well with that," and then that's how they piece it together and write a song. So that's interesting. I find that interesting. So that's cool. All right, so question 5, and one of the things that you and Jen do often when you're on the show is you'll talk about social issues within comic books and different things. And that is, I'm trying to think of, I told you before we started that I want to ask this in a respectful way because I too agree, with the issues, most of the issues you guys are talking about. But I'm not a big fan of them always necessarily being in comic books. Like, for example, Jonathan Kent comes out as bisexual. And that's fine. I'm a huge Superman fan. I don't care. I'm not going to stop reading the book, because Jonathan Kent comes out as bisexual. That's perfectly fine with me. But it also feels like a big money grab in a way to me by, DC trying to grab into something it's pretty hot on the mainstream right now. You're seeing a lot of that content with that culture. Kind of talk to me a little bit about that as far as, what that means to you in your life, because you guys talk about it a lot. So it seems to be a big part of your lives. What that means in your life, and do you like seeing those issues brought up in comic books?
Absolutely. So yeah, I absolutely love being able to see social issues and things like that brought up in the comics. Sometimes I agree they're not done in the best way. Like I completely agree with you. Like I was so happy when Jonathan Kent was announced as bisexual. I felt like it was something that was, to me at least, it was very obvious, and for them to confirm it. But I do agree they did it on, National Coming Out Day. They did it, huge variant covers and things like that. There are definitely instances and moments where it does feel like we're trying to be relevant. We're trying to be woke and, trying to grab what we can. So I agree. There's definitely instances of that. But for me, I think it's just being able to see things, ideals, and representation for me, on something that I love so much, like within the pages of something. So maybe I don't need it, in my face. But if I'm reading it and it just comes naturally, I get really, really excited over that. And I do think it's definitely a generational difference, because people my age, that whole millennial age bracket, it's something that it's part of our everyday life. So sometimes we don't even second guess it. We don't see it as an outlier or something different. I see it in a book and I'm like, that's kind of neat. Or I get really excited because maybe it's something that I don't get to see very often in media, whether it be comics, TV, literature, or movies. So there's definitely that. But I think for me, I've always been drawn to the idea of, I don't want to say a freedom fighter, but the idea of fighting for what you believe in. So we talked about Green Arrow a little bit and how Green Arrow really was my leap into Cape Comics and into DC. And to this day, he is still my favorite character. And the reason I think I was drawn to that book as much as I was, being the Kevin Smith and Judd Winnick run, is because they do bring that aspect to the forefront of Ollie's character. We see him at the courthouse marrying gay couples because Star City won't allow it, but because he's the mayor, technically he can do it. We see him, fighting for people of color. And this even goes so far back into Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' run in the Green Arrow, Green Lantern, where it always felt like he was sticking up for those people of color and he was sticking up for the little guy. And I agree, sometimes it's not done in the best way. But when I can see my ideals and the ideals that I share represented, I think it makes those characters feel more realistic to me. These are people that I could see myself hanging out with, having a conversation. And ultimately, it's people that I can look up to. So I think that's why I personally really like it, is because I don't know anything different, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I actually, I mean, I don't know why I'd never thought of this before, but what you said is it's very generational. Like my kids, excuse me, my children don't know any different, right? As far as these different lifestyles, and it's okay, to be yourself and, just to be who you are. And my kids don't know any different. Now, when I was growing up, it was almost like taboo, to live that lifestyle. And I don't know that I ever felt that way. I wasn't raised to think those things were taboo, as far as having different lifestyles and having, different choices in who you love and who you want to be with and things like that, or who you want to be just in general. I live in a small town. It's very church oriented. It's definitely the Bible Belt. Like I said, I wasn't raised. My parents didn't raise me to be, to look at anybody any differently. We're all, as my dad would say, look, son, we're all just trying to get by. What you want to, how you want to live your life. He said, is totally up to you, and you shouldn't judge anybody for how they live their lives. And that always kind of made sense to me, and I've carried that on. Now, but the generational aspect of it is, I think you're right, because you have a whole new generation of comic book fans coming up that, like you said, that's just everyday life for them. It's just what you know, and so it makes sense that you would see that shift in comic books, where you got an old fogey like me who's like, I work every day. I use these books to escape. I don't want to listen to politics or, know this writer's political views or anything like that in a comic book. I just want to read a good story. But you're also right in that they've done this for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. They would bring through different political ideology, or not ideology necessarily, just here's something that's happening and maybe you should pay attention to it.
Exactly. I mean, let's look at X-Men. X-Men was created as an allegory for racism in the world. At the end of the day, that's why the mutants were created. That's why we have mutants. It's why we have X-Men. So it's always been there. It might not have been as in your face, or maybe not as heavy-handed, but it was always there, at least subtly.
Awesome. No, great. I mean, that's a great answer, because I've always been, like I said, I love listening to you guys. Don't always agree with what you say on particular issues, which is fine. It's, I don't care. At the end of the day, we all love comic books, and that's what I'm there for, is to listen to comic books. And if you say something about a social issue that makes me think, even better, right? And, like I said, at the end of the day, we all have this singular love for what it is, comic books and that medium. But I always wanted to ask you that. No, and, I was like, because I knew you would answer, I was like, Mars is so opinionated that she's going to answer me whether she likes it or not. She will answer me. And so, no, but I really loved your answer, though, because I think you hit on a lot of points that maybe I don't even know I'd really thought about it, as far as the generational aspect of it. Like I said, the part I don't like about it is what I said earlier with what they did with Jonathan Kent, which, like you said, it was kind of obvious, right? Like it
was very obvious. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was very happy about it, but it was very I see what you're doing, and it's not going to make a lot of people happy, and within reason.
Right. No. Excellent. Love that one. All right. So question 6. And, you mentioned it earlier, you were seeking somebody out, to another female in the community that you could be friends with and rap ideas off of and different things. So I'm kind of wondering if you'll speak to that a little bit about the challenges of being a female in the comic book community.
Oh, absolutely. So I feel like it's getting better, especially because, I always joke I've been in this game for, 8, 9, 10 years now. Actually, it's probably been about 10 years, because 2012 is probably when I started, going into shops, creating a pool list, and collecting and spending money from there. But I will say, I feel like it definitely has changed. We've kind of progressed a little bit. We do see a lot more women reading comics now. And I think that is because comics are just evolving in general. It's not just superheroes anymore. It's not just, the big two. We have indie comics. We have books like Snot Girl. We have books like True Romance, which was an anthology from Image Comics as well. We have all of these different types of books that I feel like anybody can kind of jump into. But being a woman in comics, it definitely can be a little intimidating. And I'm thankful that I'm as strong-willed and as opinionated as I am, because I think that was some of the unfortunate experiences that I've had. If I wasn't the way that I was, I probably would have hung it up forever. I would have felt like I didn't belong and I wasn't supposed to be in it. My favorite thing, I mean, it's not really my favorite, but my favorite thing is going into a new comic book shop, where I'm not recognized. Because, obviously I'm recognized by everybody in my local area with how much I spend and go and stuff like that. But going into a new comic shop, on road trips and just experiencing it, and always being asked a couple different questions. Sometimes it's, oh, are you picking these books up for your boyfriend? To which I reply, only if he's paying for them. Or only if he's paying for them and storing them and everything else. Or my other favorite thing is I've had a couple experiences, because I am, a collector, and I love collecting variant covers. So sometimes I will buy 3 or 4 issues of the same comic because I like the cover. And I've had a couple instances where I've gone into a shop, I've had books on a stack, and I've taken them up to a register, and I kind of get talked down to, and they're like, oh, well, don't you know that these are all the same book and it's just a different cover? And I'm like, yes, I am. Now, please let me give you money so I can take
Yeah, take my money.
So that happens a lot, and it's unfortunate. And like I said, I feel like people in shops, they've gotten a little bit better, because when you walk into a shop now, I see women, I see people of color, I see, people that I would be friends with. It's not just, older men that buy comic books on their way home from work, which isn't a bad thing. And I've had great conversations with some of these people, but and also I noticed it too. The employees that shops have are now being more diverse. We have women employees, and I always get like really excited, and I tend to like lean towards like having genuine conversations with them, because I feel like I'm being taken genuine. I feel like I'm not being talked down to, or so it's definitely been a struggle, and I think that too is why I really started my platform, because I wanted a place where people like me could get information, could find what type of books maybe they were looking to get into, without feeling intimidated by, say, an older male employee.
Yeah. Are there any upsides? There are some challenges. Are there any upsides?
Upside. I've gotten a couple of discounts for being a girl, which sounds
right.
really bad, but I'll take a discount.
Hey, that's right.
I think just being a part of a community, being able to form this community, and meeting people. And it also too, the way I look at books is different than the way that some of these men look at books, the way that I critique them and things like that. I'm able to kind of get a third eye lens into it. So there's definitely some upsides for sure.
Cool. So question 7, and this is one that my daughters always want me to ask when I have a woman on the channel or a female on the channel. They ask me, you got to ask this question. So here it is. Are there any female comic book characters that you, Mars, relate to? Like, that's me.
God. Are they ready? Because I've got a list, and I feel
Bring it on.
I feel like this list evolves. I really do. So I used to think that it was Black Canary, because Black Canary's headstrong. She's gone through some trauma in her life. She has a not really great relationship with her mother, as bad as that seems to say. She's madly in love with Green Arrow, which I am too. But I feel like I've kind of evolved in terms of characters I relate to. So more recently, I've been jumping into Marvel. And X-23 in particular is one that I relate with, because of a lot of, past, without going into it, past trauma she's gone through. She's this little angry, small green is what we call her. She's this angry little dwarf that, is just mad at the world, but we've seen her grow and kind of progress into becoming her own person and accepting and loving herself and loving other people. But most recently, Scarlet Witch. I've really, really connected with Scarlet Witch, both with a lot of her books more recently deal a lot with mental illness. I feel like she's talked about her depression and how sometimes her brain doesn't feel like her own. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people my age can kind of relate to. But it's also the idea that she has gone through so much and she's still here. She's still standing, and she does always fight to live another day. It's also too, the relationship she has with Pietro, the relationship she has with Magneto. I tend to relate to characters more that have had maybe family problems or maybe trauma issues and mental health things. I don't know why, but I really, really get excited about these characters. And like I said, Scarlet Witch right now is kind of like after WandaVision in particular, and seeing what she went through and seeing how she was still able to come out on top. I kind of have tunnel vision right now, where it's like I just want more Wanda Maximoff Scarlet Witch stuff.
I love it. Love it. All right. So the last 3 questions are more, let's just get to know Mars a little better questions. And the first one is, like, outside of comic books or comic book movies, and maybe there are none, but like, what kind of like TV shows do you watch, or movies? Like, what do you enjoy consuming?
So I'm a huge, I don't know if this counts. I feel like it kind of counts because it's kind of merged. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Huge Star Wars fan. I grew up with it. People always ask, when did you first see Star Wars? I can't tell you. I was born, bred, and raised on Star Wars, so I'm a huge Star Wars fan. My 2 favorite movies in the whole wide world outside of Star Wars, Mad Max Fury Road and Pacific Rim. which are two wildly different things, but I really like, I don't want to say dumb fun action movies because both of these movies I think have a lot of emotional intensity to them, which is another reason why I'm drawn to them. But sometimes I just like seeing big dumb robots punch each other, and I really like sci-fi stuff and I really like fantasy stuff. So, but then I also like dumb comedy shows at night like Parks and Rec. I do like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I absolutely love my favorite show right now that I'm obsessed with, and I'm sad because it's on break again. What We Do in the Shadows, which is a vampire comedy show. It's like a mockumentary, but with vampires. So I really do kind of watch and engage a little bit with everything, but I definitely lean more towards like the nerdy stuff, like sci-fi and post-apocalyptic stuff. Anything that's post-apocalyptic, I'll watch. I that's my favorite genre. Lord of the Rings, fantasy stuff. If it seems even the bit nerdy, I'm there.
Love it. All right, question 9. What kind of music do you like?
Ooh, everything. Again, everything. I'm just like a giant melting pot when it comes to music. So a lot of people think that was like my whole aesthetic. Because I do have a very contrasting aesthetic, as you can tell, very like punk girl, but then you've got the bubblegum pink aesthetic. So that's just me all around. So rapid fire favorite like musicians like David Bowie, like one of my number ones. Absolutely love Bowie. It's what I was raised on. Actually, it wasn't what I was raised on, but I grew into it. I was actually raised on a lot of like 80s synthwave stuff. So like Aha, New Order, Pet Shop Boys. I'm really into that. But again, I also like metal bands and I like, oldies like 50s crooners. Like all this week, I've been listening to Frankie Valli. I don't know why, but I'm on a Frankie Valli kick. And then like rap groups like Megan Thee Stallion and Doja Cat, who I just kind of am drawn to their aesthetic and I'm drawn to their like style and just the upbeatness of their music. And then Run the Jewels is a rap group and they're probably my favorite, music group. And a lot of it is because of some of the politics in their music and just the strong beats. But honestly, if you were to look at my Spotify history and you were to see the type of music I listen to, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint which side of my personality it is because it's everything.
I love it. Like I have been introduced to Megan Thee Stallion.
She's great.
Yeah, I mean she's got a wild look as far as like I can see that for you. As far as that aesthetic goes, I can see, and her music honestly is pretty good. Like as far as the beats go, it reminds me a lot of music that I listened to when I was younger, when I was listening to hip hop and rap and things like that. I listen to it some today, but I'm back to where everything's classic for me. I listen to the new stuff that my daughters play when they're in the vehicle with me. But the majority of what I listen to is, like older music. Do you like going to shows? Do you like going to concerts and things like that?
I actually went to like my first real concert this past summer with my partner. He took me to see. He had tickets for. It was called the Hella Mega Tour, and it was Fall Out Boy, which I grew up with and was like obsessed with. Weezer and Green Day. So that was just like a really fun show, and it felt like different like eras of my childhood growing up. And I was always the type of person where I'm like, I don't need to see them live. Like I feel like it's a big waste of money. That being said, I would chill out a ton of money to see Meg Thee Stallion live because I just think she's phenomenal. But once I was there and once like the music is flowing and people are like dancing and singing and screaming at the top of their lungs, we walked out and the next day I was like, all right, who are we going to go see next? So I'm hoping 2022 we can possibly see the Misfits and My Chemical Romance together because I just think it would be a really fun show.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, no, I'm a big concert guy. I like to ask that question because I love live music. Like when I was in college, we didn't go to like dance clubs. We would go to dance clubs occasionally, but if we were going, for our entertainment, really, we would go where they played live music and a lot of local bands that played original tunes. Things like that. That's what we like to go watch. And so, I went to my first concert post-COVID, I guess I would say, called Louder Than Life here in Louisville. And, you had everywhere from Judas Priest, Metallica headlined 2 nights, so that was why I went. But you had Machine Gun Kelly. You had Cypress Hill.
Yeah.
Just Korn. Snoop Dogg was supposed to be there. I wanted to see Snoop, but he wasn't. He didn't come because of COVID concerns. But no, that's cool. Yeah, I'm like that too, though. I'm all over the place with my music. Yeah, I'm all over the place. which I was raised in the country, so there's some country music I like.
I feel like that's the only thing I don't touch. I don't really touch country music. There may be like one or two songs because my dad's very country, so I grew up with it. But I try to stay away from the country stuff.
Yeah, no, I love it, man. Well, look, I've had an absolute blast, Mars. So we're on question 10, and so I wanted to ask you, like, from an artist or not an artist, from a writer standpoint, like who are your favorite writers today? In the comic book genre, like, and really even, maybe expand outside of comic books if there's, fiction or, books that you like to read, those kind of things.
I feel like my taste in writers has definitely evolved. I mean, Gail Simone, I think, is just, she doesn't do as much anymore, it feels like, in terms of writing. She does a lot more of the behind the scenes stuff. But Gail Simone, for me, as a creator, as a woman in comics, she was the blueprint. That was who I wanted to be when I grew up. When I still grow up, I want to be Gail Simone. So she's always been at the top of the list in terms of what she's done for the industry, what she did for these characters, and just what she's brought to comics. But in terms of writers that I love and writers that I'll always pick up stuff for, Becky Cloonan's a big one because I think she's a phenomenal creator, both artist and writer wise. Jeff Lemire, same thing. I absolutely love his storytelling. Judd Winnick, who unfortunately does not do stuff because of some stuff that happened with DC Comics. He now focuses on his more children imprint line. So I can't really get into that because it's not for me. It's a little under my age, but I still will pick up and read everything that he's touched. Tom Taylor, Tom King, the list, honestly, it keeps growing, and it feels like every year I add one or two writers where it's like, okay, if I see their name on something, I have to pick it up. I tend to lean more to a lot of writers that not only have big ideas and kind of break outside of the mold, but I feel like I personally tend to lean towards writers that focus on emotion, focus on character development and character interactive moments. So like Tom Taylor does a lot of those. And I feel like that's why, and Jeff Lemire does that as well, where it's always pushing that character to the next level. So I feel like that's really where I lean in terms of writing.
Yeah, no, Tom Taylor can't really do any wrong right now, with what he's been doing. Because, like I said, I've been waiting for somebody to write the Superman, because I love Superman. I can't help it. It's just, growing up, it's just who I love. I related to Clark Kent, in that sense. And he has done such a phenomenal job with Superman, Son of Kal-El. I think it's so good. He just can't seem to do any wrong right now. And this is, I don't know, people find this funny. I just found Jeff Lemire. Because I was out for a long time, and then when I came back in, the way that I'm reading, like you said, I'm kind of all over the place, and so I've, as I get to meet more people in the community and I find out who they like, I'll go check those out. And I found Jeff Lemire. I think he's phenomenal. Maze Book right now is one of my favorites. I absolutely love Maze Book right now. So, all right, that's our 10 questions, Mars. That was a hoot. I had a ball. So glad that you agreed to come on and hang out with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute blast. It really was.
Cool. So, guys, I'll put down down in the description below where you can find Mars, her personal channel, ThatComicGirlll. I'll put that down in the description below. I'll also link Comics Will Break Your Heart so that you can find the Sunday chat. One of the best things on YouTube, in my opinion. Two very, very well-formed opinions about books. And as I told Jen when I had her on here, Mars, it's just very high level. It's a high-level discussion about comic books. My wife even likes it, and she doesn't like comic books. I was listening to it one day, and she was like, "Who are those girls?" And I was like, "Well, just two people I found on YouTube, and I really enjoy their content." And she's a language arts teacher. And she was like, "I love the way that they talk about that. It's just, so interesting." So yeah, if you're looking for something different than your average, it has some, pieces of your average comic book review, but it's just so much more. It's just, there's a lot more to it. So definitely go check these guys out. Check out Mars on her channel, ThatComicGirlll. Go over, sub up to Comics Will Break Your Heart as well, where you can watch the comic chat on Sundays. I promise you, you'll love it. It's everybody that I've turned on to that is like, dude, well done. That's it. You guys do such a solid job.
Thank you.
Love Mars, one of my favorite people out there in the community. Make sure you go check her out. Also, as I remind you at the end of every show, I have the discount code with Street Level Hero LA. That's STC10. You can get 10% off your order, but they will donate 25% of your overall order to the American Cancer Society for cancer research. Mars, it's something that JPG and I started, and we were like, well, we'll do this for a short time, see how it goes. And it just, people kept buying the books and, using the code, and we've raised a bunch of money for the American Cancer Society. So make sure you go over, check that out. It's very, very cool. Yeah, phenomenal interview. Loved everything about this one. Go check out my girl Mars. This has been 10 Questions.